Well, here I am with Chris D'Adamo, expert researcher, talking all about the immune system. And as we get started, this is the first interview I've done since I got belted in the face with a golf club from my son. Some of you guys that follow me on social media, I put up a post of my black eye and stitches and whatnot. And so, if you're raising young boys, just stand back because it can be a dangerous sport. And Chris was sharing with me that he has a 3-year-old son as well, so he understands.
Yeah, I haven't quite got into Shiner territory yet, but I've been forewarned. So
yeah, so lots of energy. I mean, it's a blessing to be able to raise. I have twin boys; they're great athletes. I coach them in baseball, basketball. We've won tons of championships. I coached them in soccer. They're great athletes, great kids, but full of energy, and any opportunity they have to hit something hard, they do it. And I was standing a little too close, and that backswing came up and hit me, and I'm just grateful that it didn't get my eye or my teeth, and that a shiner, this black eye will go away in time. But fortunately, nothing permanent there. So with that said, this time of year that we're talking, this is a early November interview. We really need to focus in on the immune system. This is quote unquote cold and flu season. And so that's what we're going to really study and focus on today. And I know, Dr. D'Adamo, you've spent years studying natural products, things like Beta-Glucan. So what first drew you into this field, and why has Beta-Glucan become such a focus for you?
Well, what first drew me into this field was my own health. I, like your kids, was an athlete, and I found myself getting way more colds and respiratory infections than I wanted when I was in my 20s. I was pushing things pretty hard in the gym, doing competitive martial arts and basketball and all these things, and just found myself getting wiped out by colds. And I had begun my sort of health journey and investigation of natural products at that point in time. And I came across the literature on beta-glucans, which was at that point in time, and has only grown, like probably the most oppressive for any natural product, and started taking beta-glucans and learned more as time went along in terms of how to choose a good product and so on. But it was really just to help myself avoid those annoying and worse sometimes cold and flus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for those that are new to this idea of beta-glucan, what is that, and where do we find it naturally in nature?
Yeah, so what's interesting, that they're in a number of different foods and sort of plants. So mushrooms are a source of beta-glucans. You look back thousands of years of history of people using mushrooms medicinally in traditional Chinese medicine and so on. It was actually likely due to the beta-glucan and polysaccharides. So mushrooms are one, seaweed, certain grains like oats, and perhaps most powerfully yeast. So you can find these throughout the natural world, and really quite powerful immunomodulators in a variety of ways we can talk about today.
For sure. And you use that term immune modulator. Let's go into some detail on that, how beta-glucan works there.
So basically what they tend to do is, well, there's a variety of different ways, and I can talk about how they do it, but it's not just pure immunostimulation, but they actually seem to balance the immune system in a variety of ways. Now, much of the time that is, helping mount an immune defense to a pathogen. And it does that primarily through a couple of unique mechanisms of activity, because there are a number of natural products that support the immune system, and I recommend doing numerous things. But what's really interesting about the beta-glucans is they bind to these two receptors on immune cells, one called complement receptor 3, which was initially called the glucan receptor, because the beta-glucan uniquely fit into this. The other one called dectin-1, and no other natural products bind to these sites on cells. And what it ends up doing is it stimulates a cascade of activity that increases natural killer cell activity, macrophage activity, and so on, that essentially really help fight all kinds of pathogens. And then there's other ways too, toll-like receptors. So they really are powerfully active in the immune system in ways that other natural products aren't, which is what's a pretty cool way to put together a whole strategy to enhance your immune system.
Yeah, that's really key. And we find them in nature, like you said, like with mushrooms, for example. They're one of the powerful compounds that give mushrooms their medicinal-like effects. And so as we get into cold and flu season, why are people a little bit more immune compromised right now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a lot of different thoughts on that. I think part of it is, we're indoors more often, we're around, so it's tighter kind of circumstances in which this can be passed from person to person. I'm also a big believer in sunlight and its impact on the immune system. So we're not getting as much of that. Where you are, you get a decent amount. Where I am in Maryland, we don't get a whole lot as we get deeper into the winter. So that's part of it, and that's what tends to cause these spikes or cold and flu seasons for the most part. So I think that's where we situationally really want to amp up our immune defenses.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got to take care of our immune system this time of year. Obviously, more and more people are getting colds, fevers, and flus. Yeah, I think it really has a lot to do with getting good sun exposure. I think that's critical. Obviously, stress plays a big role. When we have daylight savings time and hour changes, the impact on the circadian rhythm is going to play a role. So I think there's a number of big factors there.
Sure, and poor dietary change, for a lot of folks too, around holidays and so on. So it's like, there's this confluence of factors. But I'm with you. I think the light environment, the lack of sun, the lack of activity, a lot of these things, the stress, a lot of these things just sort of collide to create weakened immune and then opportunistic infections.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've been involved in some different studies on beta-glucan and biological aging. What insights can you share about its potential to slow or even reverse aspects of aging?
Yeah, this is a really cool area. I imagine we're going to talk about cancer and respiratory infections where there's, dozens of human clinical studies for each of those. But aging is an area that I think is fascinating with this. So some of your viewers may be familiar with the, sort of the hallmarks of aging. It's these different categories that have been identified as contributing to what we consider aging, a lot of the phenotypes of aging. Big one of these is senescence, or these cells that are not really alive, not really dead. There's kind of zombie cells that are causing inflammatory havoc in the body. And immunosenescence is a really big part of that. So essentially the senescence of immune cells. And there have been a number of really important, impactful papers in, major medical journals that think that, in fact, immunosenescence may be like one of, not the major driver of aging, one of them. And beta-glucans, we've wrapped up the study now. So we're awaiting the results. We're going to present these at the A4M conference coming up in next month in December. But we looked at how taking the Better Way Health Beta-Glucan 500 product could impact people's biological aging. So we use the True Diagnostic, which is a really, really cool lab for people who look into not just what their chronological age is, but what their biological age is, the age of their immune system. So we're really, really excited to see what these results hold. But already knowing what we know about how beta-glucan supports immune activity, we've got pretty darn good reason to think that it's going to support longevity. And you also think about indirect. So that's directly. But if you look at indirectly, some of the leading killers, causes of mortality of cancer being among them. And there are dozens of clinical trials that show that beta-glucan can help, with cancer prognosis. So you get both the direct effects that we're looking at mechanistically, and then the indirect effects of just preventing, cancerous colds and flus, which with age can become, more than just an annoyance, as I said, for me when I was in my 20s, but can actually become pretty serious for people. So those are the ways in which we think it's happening. There's a lot of deeper mechanisms, but that's kind of the high level of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And beta-glucan, we think about different elements and how it impacts the gut. It is considered, it's a prebiotic, but it also has kind of postbiotic effects. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So it the prebiotic effects, essentially it feeds lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species in the gut. So that's those are the probiotic. There's many of those, but those are probiotic species.
Yeah.
That are going to support immune system and health overall. and the beta-glucans feed them. They also help produce short-chain fatty acids. This gets into that sort of like postbiotic effect, and those are really important, like butyrate for protecting the gut lining. We hear so much about intestinal permeability and all the gut problems that people have too. So this really is a nice way to sort of feed our good bacteria and protect the gut against damage and against stress, NSAIDs, alcohol, a lot of these things that break down the gut barrier.
Yeah, and it also has been shown to have positive effects on mood and stress tolerance. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's pretty much. It's one of these things because like, what does it not do? It's really fascinating. It's all good science here. So it works through the HPA axis, helping lower cortisol, which is pretty interesting. So I've seen that in animal models, like mechanistic understanding that. But even in human beings, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis published earlier this year that showed the positive effects on mood and energy levels with beta-glucan supplementation. So again, probably owing, it's tough to know what the most upstream factor is here, but probably some of the activity in the gut, better immune function in general, therein leading to better health and better mood. And so there's just a wealth of evidence.
I would imagine its effect on butyric acid production and perhaps reduction in endotoxin lipopolysaccharides would probably be like the two main factors, I would imagine.
Yeah, those are definitely big factors. I mean, again, they've shown with butyrate and some of these, and then the LPS that just seem to wreak havoc on human health. So by helping build up that gut barrier and enhance immune function, sort of providing a kind of a double barrel impact on those problems that many people have.
For sure. And now there's also research out on using beta-glucan with cancer. What do you know about that?
Yeah, that's the area that's just mind-boggling how much good work has been done in that area. Last I checked, I'd have to go look at the exact number, but it's dozens of clinical studies. So preclinical studies are interesting too when you look at animal models and cell culture stuff, but in human beings, showing how beta-glucans can help with the quality of life of people dealing with a variety of different cancers across the body, but also even cell counts and immune function. What I think is so compelling about that is that if you can show activity against, again, not different types of cancers, heart tumors and soft cell, it just goes to show what happens when you work at this foundational level of immunity, how many benefits you have to human beings overall. I mean, it's just astounding how much good work has been done there. So it's clearly, in certain countries in Asia, it's really common to use this, even in conventional medical care, to use beta-glucans as kind of an adjuvant to chemotherapy or whatever other types of treatments that they're doing. It's not as common here, but it should be. I mean, if you look at the data for it. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, let's talk about using the right dosage. Obviously, you can get some of it from foods. Like I would say it's definitely the healthiest component of something like oatmeal. And it's also one of the main components, one of the main constituents that give health benefits to different medicinal mushrooms like reishi mushroom, cordyceps, things like that. But if you're taking a supplement straight like a 1,3-D beta-glucan, what dosage do you recommend for everyday wellness versus when you're actively trying to fight off an illness?
Yeah, so actually to touch on the first part you talked about too. So there are different sources of beta-glucans have different effects. So you mentioned the 1,3 and 1,6 beta-glucans. We'll talk about the dosage there. I think those are the ones you really want to focus on for immune health. But the 1,4 beta-glucan's a different structure. That's what's found in oats, and that can be useful for cardiovascular health. So it's a soluble fiber that produces kind of this gel that can improve lipids and other markers of cardiovascular health. Not really much immune function there, though, if you're getting it from oats. Much more, from the mushrooms and yeast is the 1,3 and 1,6. Those are the ones that are the really powerful immunomodulators. So dosages, if you get a good, it's nice to get a mix of those two. If you get a good mix, probably 100 milligrams, many would say, for daily use, and then 500 milligrams, during cold or flu season. I can tell you that when I travel from around people who are sick, I'll usually bump it up to 1 or 2 grams even, but that's just me. I'd say 500 milligrams is a good dose for, this time of year, especially if you're cold and flu season, or if you're, around sick folks or whatever it is, you're just trying to stay healthy.
Yeah. And now, do you recommend that taking that in like a single dose or divided doses throughout the day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it matters all that much. Certain things, vitamin C, which is great for the immune system too. That's pretty important to dose as several times if you can, because it's got such a short half-life. The effects of this tend to build up, over time. So after a week or so, let's say that. So I'll give you an example. We're traveling out of the country next week, and we've all already started to bump it up. We'll give ourselves about a week to really kind of get into this, acute protection phase. Typically, I don't think it matters a whole lot. Others may have a different opinion on that. I think the key is just to get it in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what other things are you doing? Obviously, how do you use it personally? And then what other things are you doing on a regular basis to keep your immune system strong?
Sure. Okay. Well, what I do in a general sense is, I'm a big zinc and vitamin C, some of those core types of things. I actually really big into keeping the nasal patches, so things like the Clear, the XLEAR, the xylitol spray Clear. I like that stuff. Again, I think the cornerstone for me is the Beta-Glucan. I think that's the one that really does it. Fermented foods will be another one. Big into good whole milk, yogurt and glass jar and this kind of stuff. So I think those are some of the things I mentioned before, trying to get, the right light exposure, sleep, stress management, because there's the stuff that we consume, but as you well know, there's all the other risks to it. If we're super stressed out or not sleeping very well, those are things that we really have to address too. So that's that kind of there are a lot of little things that I do tinkering with here and there, but those are kind of my foundational.
Yeah, 100%. Keeping your blood sugar stable, eating real foods, staying away from the processed foods. I'm sure that's critical. Really good circadian rhythm, getting good sleep, getting sun whenever you're able to throughout the day. All really, really critical things. And then you mentioned a couple of things, zinc. I'm a huge advocate of that as well. I've tested a lot of people with their copper zinc levels. And because a lot of people will say, well, if you take too much zinc, you're going to deplete copper. What I found is that most people have a lot more copper than they have zinc. And taking something like an extra 20 milligrams or so a day can be really, really helpful for the immune system, optimizing your vitamin D. And then doing things to help support your gut, like something like a Beta-Glucan, I think is really powerful. That gut immune and that gut brain connection, so critical.
Totally agree. Yeah, and I'm with you on the copper side of things too. I think a lot of us, we're getting it in our diet. So I'm a big organ meat person, liver and so on. So there's a lot of copper in that. Oh, yeah. And I'm with you. I think far more people have that balance, maybe with too much copper. And it's not just for immune. There's mental health things that some people believe that you get too much copper, not enough zinc. So I've found that you can test these things too. But I think for the most part, as you noted, 20 milligrams, maybe even 50, depending upon what you're doing, of zinc. 20 milligrams probably pretty safe for most people.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Well, you've spoken about trained immunity, and that's a fascinating idea that our innate immune system can actually learn and improve over time. I think that's really fascinating. How does Beta-Glucan fit into that picture? How does it help train our immune system?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So, from a high level, there is innate immunity, which is your first line of defense. It's not specific. It's primitive. It's been in our systems for very long periods of time. Then you have the adaptive immunity, which is what's trained. It's specific. It's things like antibodies and so on. So you have those two main classes. What's really cool is that the trained immunity, it's a relatively recent understanding of what that is. It's been around for as long as human beings have been around, but we haven't understood it until recently. So it's a type of innate immunity. It just lasts longer. So it as opposed to that kind of quick response, you'll find that this lasts for weeks or months even. And what's good about it, can be good or bad actually, because you can have maladaptive trained immunity where you're exposed, you mentioned LPS, lipopolysaccharide will actually kind of harm your immune system for a longer period of time. Whereas there are certain components, Beta-Glucan is one of them, that's been shown to enhance that. So let's say, again, we're traveling, right? So who knows what you're going to be exposed to when you're in a plane and all the airports, all that kind of stuff. So, you give yourself, that sort of overall larger, broader enhancement that's going to last for some time. So it's a really cool and emerging area of understanding in our immune system. That it's not quite as simple as the innate, fast, and adaptive, kind of slower, longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you talked about how beta-glucan impacts stress levels as well and impacts cortisol. Can you go through that again for our listeners and just kind of break that down in more detail?
Sure. It's again through stimulating the HPA axis, we've seen decreases in cortisol levels. And, cortisol, you mentioned the circadian clock, our circadian rhythm is cortisol should be pretty high in the morning to get us up and going. But you don't want it ever too high, and you don't want it the opposite, where your cortisol levels are too high in the evening or night when you're supposed to be settling down and going to sleep. So there's been some evidence that shows that beta-glucan reduces cortisol levels, which is really very interesting. There's probably other things going on with this as well. Again, it could be gut mediated and so on, but that's like for our understanding of how that, achieving those positive effects on mood, it's the cortisol and then probably some of the stuff, because we know the big connection between the gut and the brain. So probably some as yet not fully understood relationships going on there.
Yeah, like we were talking about, higher LPS in the bloodstream is going to create more of kind of a stress response in the body. So that can increase cortisol. And if beta-glucan's lowering that endotoxin release and then also increasing butyric acid, you would think that would have a positive effect on that HPA axis.
Without a doubt. Yeah, that's going to be one of the drivers there for certain.
Yeah, so that's a great thing people need to realize, is that your mood, certainly there's, stressors that we all experience in life, but a lot of the way that we react to stress is going to come down to kind of like the baseline level of resilience we have, which our gut and our immune system is really impacting that. Somebody that has, a lot more toxins being released from their gut is going to have a lower level of stress resilience than somebody that has lower level of toxins and higher amounts of, positive compounds, these postbiotic compounds like butyric acid, basically better gut health, better emotional regulation, better stress tolerance.
Yeah, you mentioned that the environmental toxin, that's been another passion area of mine in recent years. I just think these are some of the most pernicious things we're facing. I mean, I think that should be as foundational as our diet, our movement, sleep, and stress management is just toxin awareness. I mean, they're pervasive. Whether it's glyphosate and everything, or the benzene or acetylene from vehicle exhaust, or we published a paper a few years ago on polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. From any kind of smoke that you're exposed to, whether that's cigarette smoke or just a chimney, fireplace, these kinds of things. So we are just swimming in this stuff, and mold and mycotoxins. So you mentioned that resilience, how full the cup is with these toxins and how you can get rid of them. What's pretty interesting too when it comes to beta-glucan is, forever chemicals, PFOAs, we hear those quite a bit that are in a whole bunch of things, that we wonder how can we get rid of these things. There's actually some evidence that beta-glucan can help get rid of that. So we need more studies on that. But, I just think that too. So when you talk about the immune system and mood and so on, I think you have to think about those environmental toxins. I'm curious to see, what you think on that too, because I feel like it is as foundational as the other lifestyle stuff we talk about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're constantly dealing with exogenous toxins from the environment, and then as well as endotoxins, right? Just being produced from gut bacteria, for example, right? And they're constantly bombarding our system. We have a certain bucket of toxins that we can handle and adapt to. But for most people, their bucket is overflowing, right? So in that bucket, we should have little holes. That's our drainage pathways. That's, we need to be peeing, pooping, breathing, and sweating out these toxins on a regular basis. So we can handle a certain amount of toxins, and we're all going to be exposed to them. But most people, their drainage pathways are clogged. They're not peeing and pooping enough. They're not sweating, barely ever sweating, right? Not breathing right. They're not getting the toxins out, and they're being bombarded with them. And so just like you talked about, the microplastics, the, PFOAs, the forever chemicals, the heterocyclic amines and the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that were coming from, cooking and exhaust and environmental pollution and all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, we're just being bombarded. And so, we got to do two things. We got to reduce our exposure to them. And then we need to make sure that our drainage pathways are opened up. And then supporting that gut is really key, right? And that's kind of where something like a beta-glucan comes in. And then also I'm a big fan of binders, things like fulvic humic acids, which can really be helpful. Activated charcoal, bentonite clay, things like that can help bind to more of these toxins and pull them out. And that's actually, I'm not a huge fan of oatmeal, but that would actually be one of the benefits of oatmeal is you get some of that beta-glucan like you were talking about, that not as much of an immune benefit, but more of the cardiovascular benefit, but you also get that rich source of soluble fiber to help pull toxins out of the gut as well. So getting good fiber in your diet can be really, really key as well for detoxification.
No doubt about it. Yeah, I'm also not real bullish on oatmeal, but that would be one of the aspects of it that I think there's a lot of other good sources of fiber that could help push some of those toxins out. But yeah, I'm big on the binders too, and I think things like chlorella and spirulina are other ones too that you could throw into that mix. I just think we need to do where our bodies, as you noted, are designed to get rid of some of this stuff. But we were never exposed to this degree of toxin type of stuff, over the, however long our species has been around, until relatively recently. So it's a key aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's really where things like supplements come in is, a lot of people will say, just eat real foods, live like our ancestors. And that is a foundational principle. So I'm 100% in agreement with that. But they were not exposed to anywhere near the level of toxicity that we are dealing with on a regular basis. And so our technology has given us many great benefits. But a downside of it is the level of toxicity that we're dealing with. And that is where we can also use technology like being able to formulate these key supplements to help us adapt and deal with that toxicity level. And so whether it's beta-glucan, spirulina, chlorella, taking these single cell algae, these different binders, things that help support liver bile flow, right, which is really key. Different, immune modulating nutrients. We talked about zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C. All these things can be really, really key for helping us adapt to the onslaught of toxicity that we're dealing with.
100%. Yeah, you get the foundations and you get all these extra tools to kind of work around those foundations.
Yeah.
Totally aligned there.
Lifestyle, you and I probably both be in agreement. Lifestyle is 80 to 90% of it. But, most people out there need that extra bump, that extra 10 to 20% that can come from a really good supplement plan.
Yeah, to achieve truly optimal health, I agree. You just sort of have to. Unless you're living just a very atypical, living in a very atypical environment without a lot of the stuff that we all come in contact. I don't even know where that would be at this stage of the world. But yeah, I'm with you. I feel like that's what you need to do to really experience optimal health.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, how about using beta-glucan with kids? I know you have a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
How should people go about, where are the right dosages with beta-glucan using it for kids?
Yeah, so that's one of the cool things is that we can actually say with some confidence, because this has been studied. A lot of times we're like, well, this would make sense for kids, or it's unlikely to be harmful. It's probably going to help, or we try this with patients and we've seen benefits. But yeah, the Better Way Health product has been studied in kids for respiratory infections.
And they have a gummy, because most of these kids
very cool.
aren't going to swallow pills. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think from about 100 milligrams, there's actually a Better Way Health has a gummy for kids and kids at heart. I have to keep those away from they taste really good. So I found myself like, how much beta-glucan did I just take when I ate 10 of these? But yeah, it's for really young kids like mine. We actually just sprinkle a Glucan 100 capsule into his whatever food he's eating, and he doesn't really notice it. So I think for a lot of kids, depending on the like a young kid, probably 100 milligrams, you could probably do more. For bigger, the kids your ages, you could do more. But it's nice that we've actually seen the clinical data to know the safety of it and the efficacy and the frequency, severity, and duration of respiratory infections.
Yeah, that's really good. And so obviously you can use it with kids. You were saying about 100 milligrams usually is a good strategy for them. Now let's talk about the research you're doing, because I know you're at the forefront of the field. What breakthroughs are you most excited about in the next few years when it comes to immune health and beta-glucan?
Well, I would say, I mean, I guess I'm biased because we're the ones that did the study, so I was obviously really interested in it, is to see how can this impact, biological aging and immune aging. So it's gonna be the first time that, a lot of what we know is biologically plausible, by supporting the immune system, it would stand to reason that people are going to age healthier and have better longevity and so on. But I'm really excited to see what we find in that study. It's not just so there's a number of things that we're looking at. We're looking at these different biological aging clocks that essentially just tell you, well, based on all these thousands of people that have been studied, what is the markers of this person's age based on the methylation of their genes, how these genes are expressed. What does that look like? And it's pretty well established in the medical literature. So that's like a big area of focus. Then there's what's called the Dunedin pace of aging. So that's what rate are you aging? So this is pretty cool too. So the mean would be 1, for per year. For every chronological year, you're aging 1 biological year. But many people have a lower score than that, so maybe 0.8, or 0.7 or something like that. That's a really good one, and then others, unfortunately, are aging more. So like a 1.1 or 1.2 would mean for every chronological year of age, you're aging 1.2 biological age. So that's a really interesting one. You may know about that longevity Olympics. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's pretty cool. They actually use this to sort of see, well, who's aging. Now I did this. I was doing pretty darn well when I tested it, but it was before my son was born. So my sleep hasn't been quite as good the last couple of years. So I'll have to do a pre-post myself. But then what else we're looking at is we're looking at the aging of the immune system in this. So there's a specific way that you can look at understanding how important the immune system is, how the immune system is aging, and then all of these different pathways of immune activity that we're looking at. So that's probably what I'm most excited to see, and I hope other groups will continue to look at this when we finish, because the data are so like crystal clear when it comes to beta-glucan being able to help prevent respiratory infections and have this useful effect in cancers and GI health and cardiovascular health. But this longevity thing is the one that's really got me excited.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I'm glad that you're doing this research and seeing a lot of this stuff. And so it's really, really good. Now let's talk about some quick wins for the audience. Like what does kind of a day in the life look like for you and the key things that you're doing on a regular basis to keep your immune system strong?
Well, I think I've really gotten into light exposure. So just a day in the life, we'll get up. I get up pretty early. So I get up before sunrise normally. So I actually kind of stage my lighting a little bit. I'll start out with kind of redder, oranger, yellower lights inside. I try to get out and watch the sunrise, go for a little walk in the morning and get that sunlight. And this is all assuming you've had a good night of sleep, because that's really just the best you can do. Where it's not always going to be perfect, but just making it a priority and doing the best you can do. So then, getting into the day, just I do it time restricted eating, not real intense. I used to be more intense with that, but I'll do, most days I'll eat in a 8 to 10 hour window. I used to do much more than that. I would eat one meal a day, but I think that's actually a little more stressful over the long haul. Curious to get your take on that. And just eating real food. I mean, for certain, that's one of the keys. The supplements I mentioned, those Beta-Glucan, C, D, zinc, fermented foods, and then just managing stress, as best you can. It doesn't have to be formal meditation or whatever it is. A spiritual practice is big for me. Just being aware of breathing, trying to breathe through my nose and not my mouth. I mean, a lot of these types of things that I think are very important. Movement. And that's another one I backed off on. Used to be really intense with heavy deadlifting and squatting and that kind of stuff. Now it's just more consistent movement, walking, some lighter strength training, and just trying to be as regimented around that night routine, minimizing not just blue and green light at night. I think a lot of people get that, but the brightness, because if you've got your red glasses on and you've still got something 10,000 lux of brightness, that's going to harm your ability to have a good night's sleep. So I think just having been really aware of light hygiene and sleep hygiene.
Yeah, it's so critical. I'm the same way. I make sure when it gets dark out at night, we dim all the lights in our house. Put on, we put our kids to bed. We have four young kids. Put them to bed, and put on blue light blocking glasses.
Yeah.
And it's very little light in our house to begin with at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to control that light in order to optimize sleep. And so if you're able to do that, then you're going to get a really nice melatonin release. And melatonin is actually a really, really powerful hormone, not only for sleep, but also for your immune system. And it drives growth hormone, right? You get a higher growth hormone surge at night when you have higher melatonin levels. And growth hormone is your quintessential anti-aging hormone. So it does a lot of the immune cleanup, helps balance the immune system, helps preserve lean body mass, burn fat for fuel. So yeah, light exposure is so critical. We got to look at light like we look at nutrition. We want to avoid processed foods. We want to avoid, high artificial light exposure, particularly, in the evenings. I think that's super critical. Now, how about sauna? Do you have a sauna? Are you able to use that at all?
Yeah, I do have a sauna. I'm big on that.
Yeah.
So I have one that, and I've actually got it rigged up where it's got red light and infrared light is the heat. So that's but the near infrared in there as well. So you kind of get, and there's a lot there in the sauna space. There's brands that operate on that. You can actually hook up a few more lights to make it hot enough. But yeah, definitely. I think you get the heat shock proteins and all these interesting mechanisms that when you get in the sauna, sweating, detoxifying. So getting back to that whole thing, it's one of the main ways that we detoxify is with our, when we sweat. So definitely a big sauna fan. It's somewhat of a cold exposure fan as well. Mm-hmm. I think you get cold shock proteins the way you have heat shock proteins also that help with this. But it sounds like you're a fan of these modalities as well.
Yeah, I would say if I can do it 5 days a week, but I definitely try to make sure it's 4 every week. I try to get 100 minutes or so of sauna time. I have infrared sauna, so I try to get it as hot as possible. Get in there, sweat, and then I have a cold tank as well. So then I do the cold plunge for usually about 2 minutes right after the sauna, and then I go take a shower. And it's like
the modern day, what do you call it, Finnish or Swedish sauna, whatever, like that's the way they would do it, where they would go in the sauna and go jump in some ice water, and you did. Yeah, I haven't gotten one of those. I just kind of do it the old-fashioned way, where I'll either take a cold shower or just do an old ice bath, going back to the sports days. I mean, it's for those that haven't done it, it's an intense first minute or two, and you feel like there's no way you're going to make it through. But if you can get by that first minute or two, hang in there and it gets better. And the nice thing about that too, I would caution, the one thing I would caution a little bit with the cold is if you're acutely fighting something, that's not the time to do it. Like if you're acutely fighting something, you want to actually warm. That's why there's even some studies with not necessarily inducing fever, but staying extra warm and doing sauna because you're helping your body get rid of those pathogens. The cold is, it's great for mental health and again, probably longevity. But if you're actively fighting something, or again, you got other people in the house that are sick or whatever, that may not be the time to do it.
Yeah, these are hormetic stressors, meaning that they're stressors on the body. Now, they're stressors that our ancestors encountered regularly. Like they didn't have like a hot water shower, right? So they had to jump in a lake or whatever. So they're stressors that our ancestors encountered regularly. Therefore, our biology knows how to adapt to them, but we only have a certain threshold. And if you're already overwhelmed with stress, or if you're fighting off an infection or something like that, then it can be pretty easy to overwhelm your system. Kind of like with exercise, you can get the right dose or you can overtrain. And when it comes to these kind of biohacks, when we're talking about sauna, we're talking about intense exercise, we're talking about fasting, we're talking about cold plunges. There's a right dose depending on, basically your baseline stress threshold coming in. And if you get the right dose, your body gets more resilient, gets stronger, you feel great. If you get the wrong dose or you get too much, right? If you don't get much, you're really not going to get a whole lot of benefit. But if you get too much, you actually get worse. And so we want to obviously caution against that. So you got to work with your body, just like exercise. If you're just starting exercise, you're obviously going to gradually move into it, gradually progress. It's kind of the same with these other things.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, I can give an example of how I stacked too many hormetic stressors at one point in time, I was doing very deep fasting. So I was doing one meal a day, was doing sauna, was doing, ice baths, exercising really hard, and was in I was like in a hard relationship period. So it was like having a lot of stress there too. And I was getting sick. And it was just becoming not hormetic stress anymore. It's becoming like chronic persistent stress. So, I mean, you can do things like in that situation, you take Beta-Glucan, you do all these other things we're talking about, but if you're stacking all these other stressors on top of it, on top of an already existing life stressful time, it's asking for trouble.
Yeah. So when it comes to these biohacks, the dose is the key, and also kind of your baseline level of stress to begin with, and then you can tailor it from there. So I think that's key. Dr. Chris, this has been a really fun interview. Really enjoyed it. I appreciate all the great work you're doing, studying the immune system, studying compounds like beta-glucan, and all the great work that you're contributing to the field. Any last words of inspiration here for our audience?
Well, the last thing I would say, like for most supplements, is when it comes to choosing a beta-glucan, you have to choose wisely because the supplements are not all created equally. And, there have been, I wish there were more of these, more head-to-head studies of different commercially available products. For beta-glucan, there have been. A researcher by the name of Dr. Vedvika, who was at University of Louisville for a long time, did these head-to-head studies comparing, over a dozen different commercially available beta-glucan products. And it's the Better Way Health ones that in every one of his studies came out on top. So for that, I would say just choose carefully. For all your supplements. I wish there were more studies like there were with Beta-Glucan, the head-to-head, but at least for Beta-Glucan, you know which way you should go to get the best effect.
Yeah, and you can go to betterwayhealth.com to find out more about their Beta-Glucan, but it's the best on the market, so definitely check that out. Again, Dr. Chris, thanks so much for all the great work you're doing. Are you on social media where people can follow you? Anything else?
I'm not really I'm more of a researcher. I'm not really much on social media, but I appreciate folks like yourself who are. I love your content, so it's fun connecting today.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Chris. God bless you, and we'll see all of you guys on a future interview. Be blessed.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.